So Simple tutorial. Good morning students. Welcome to SST So Simple tutorial. In the previous class we had an overview of the lesson The End of Bipolarity. Today we will start with the first topic, what was the Soviet system. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics USSR, my dear students, came into being after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 in Russia. What inspired this revolution? Which ideology inspired this revolution? This revolution was inspired by the ideals of socialism, which was basically opposed to the idea of capitalism. In socialism, means of production and distribution are owned and operated by the state, whereas in capitalism they are owned and controlled by private parties. This idea was also driven by the need to create an egalitarian society. Egalitarian society means a society that supports or follows the idea that all people are equal and should have the same rights and opportunities. So, this was perhaps the biggest attempt in human history to abolish the institution of private property and consciously design a society which was based on principles of equality. Okay. Let us now see the features of the Soviet system. My dear students, the makers of the Soviet system gave importance to two things. First, the state, and second, the party. On one hand, their political system centered around the Communist Party, and no other political party was allowed. Basically, they did not want any ideology that is different from communism to come up in the country. On the other hand, the economy was planned and controlled by the state. After the Second World War, the East European states like Poland, Hungary, Romania, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, who came under the control of Soviet Union, also followed the same political and economic system as that of the USSR. So what I was talking last, the Soviet economy, it was planned, it was controlled by state. In planned economy, what happens is that only the state decides what goods should be produced, how and on what scale. Be it the production of ordinary things of daily use or heavy machinery, every decision was taken by the state. Then they started 5 years plans. As a result of this, their industries grew, their economy grew, poverty started to disappear. After the Second World War, we have read that the Soviet Union had emerged as a great power. At that time, their economy, except for the US, was much more developed than the rest of the world. Soviet Russia had a good and improved complex communications network. Russia had vast energy resources including oil, iron and steel. Russia had excelled in machinery production. Russia had a vast transport sector that connected its remotest areas with efficiency. Russia had a good domestic consumer industry too, which produced everything from pins to cars, though in quality they did not match with the Western capitalist countries. They were generally inferior to what was available in the West. The next important point to note here is that the Soviet state was a welfare state. It provided a minimum standards of living for all the citizens. It provided facilities for medical care, education and child care. Besides, it also provided social security to its citizens. Social security means state assistance in cases of unemployment, old age and sickness. You can compare this system with the existing system in India. In India, we save money for our old age. We have to take care of ourselves. We depend upon our children. But in Soviet Russia, old age was the responsibility of state. Understood? Let us now see the other side of the coin. That means the drawbacks of the Soviet system. Students, just now we read that trade, agriculture, communication, industry, banks, means of transport, everything was under state control. Naturally, everywhere officials were involved. This made the state machinery huge. Not only huge, but also made the government officials powerful. Files moved slowly, there was delay in decision making. Corruption had also crept in. Thus, the Soviet system became very bureaucratic. Not only bureaucratic, it also became authoritarian. Just think yourself. When all activities are brought under state control, how can there be any scope of personal liberty? All people became servants of the state. There was no free will. They did not allow freedom of speech to people. That means people got equality, but they had to pay a price. They got equality at the cost of liberty. The Communist Party had tight control over all institutions, and they were also not accountable to the people. The party refused to recognize the urge of people in different republics to manage their own affairs, including their cultural affairs. There was in reality dictatorship of the party. Dear students, the USSR was made of several republics, and the Republic of Russia was just one of them. But in reality, Russia dominated everything, and people from other regions felt neglected and often suppressed. The constitution had introduced a federal system of government in the country. But the same constitution gave so much powers to the federal government that it assumed the character of a unitary state. The federal government enjoyed almost a dictatorial position against the republics whose powers were very insignificant. They did not enjoy the powers which the states of other federal countries enjoyed. During the Cold War, just recall, we had seen that USSR had got engaged in the arms race with the US. But then she was paying a high price for it. This had drained much of her resources. Another drain on the Soviet economy was the Soviet invasion and long occupation of Afghanistan. Soviet troops entered Afghanistan in December 1979 and remained there until February 1989. Huge expenditure was incurred in the Afghan war. It is estimated that Soviets spent around 50 billion US dollars in Afghanistan. This was an added burden to its already faltering economy. The Soviet economy failed to sustain the growth rate that it had achieved during the period of Stalin. This economic downturn had dire impacts on living standards. Soviet citizens had never enjoyed standards of living comparable to the West. They never enjoyed the infrastructure, amenities, and services that were available to the people in the Western world. With German cars, French perfumes, Italian wines, and British made appliances, West Europeans were living good life compared to the Soviet counterparts, who had become used to long queues for their daily needs. This was so because the Soviet economy had always prioritized military and industrial requirements over everyday consumer goods. As a consequence, there were dire shortages for even the most basic items. Long queues of people for bread, empty shelves in grocery stores became a familiar sight. Whereas in advanced capitalist societies, goods chased people, in the Soviet Union, people chased goods. By the 1980s, Soviet Russia could not produce enough grain to feed its own population. She relied on food grain imports, including large amounts from Western countries. This was a very embarrassing situation. Food grain imports increased everywhere. The Soviet economy that started to falter in the late 1970s finally became stagnant. This was all about the Soviet system. Let me stop here, students. Now you go through your textbook properly to have a better understanding of the topic. In the next class, we will discuss Gorbachev and the disintegration. Till then, keep reading and have a nice time. Thank you.